Ooh, hi. 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 So, since everything means everything, let me tell you something. Let me tell you, let me tell you a few things. Right, just to start this off. Just to start a little conversation. And why lead into it like this? Why is everything so mirrored off of the self? I'm not certain. I'm not certain what to say on it. But, that being said, let me get back down to business. Because I don't know. Some things feel like they need to be put in the framework of just conceptuality, and something needs to be a little bit more day to day. I liked this kind of a day to day approach to things, and kind of a like a disclosure of my body, right? Not my body in whole, but just pieces of it, who I am, and what I'm doing, and the habits of the soul, right? Within the dying carcass or within the aging carcass, and um, I don't know, accepting. Right, there's a certain degree that you have to accept certain things, but this isn't. God, this isn't really. I haven't oriented myself to this conversation yet. I just started it, so hence coffee, right? So, and I don't, and even coffee, I was like, I am done drinking coffee. I don't need the volatility, right? So, anyway, you guys see the dots on the face? It's weird. It's like all of the things that you do historically in the sun. I like would paint in the sun a lot, so I have these dots, right? I have these dots on my hand, and then I have these dots, right, which are like candy dots, and then I have this here painting I'm working on, trying once again, like other paintings, to connect the dots. And anyway, yesterday, after a long, dilated, very placid mental state, things mentally were regulated. My frequency level had hit kind of just a sense of general apprehension of data sets, right? So that I was able to inculcate the data set into my being, sit with it, right? But yesterday was peculiar because things then became very, very warped. And it was good. It was good to go through the warping. But I don't know. Then I want to make allusions to Star Trek and warp speed. My attempt in this video is not to banter about, right? It's to get to very specific ideas about certain things. And so I want to be able to articulate those. I think I just got a little bit ahead of myself before I knew exactly how I was going to ground into the concepts, into the ideas. And since then, I've allowed my mind to wander a bit. Since thinking I was going to do this to actually doing it, there's a bit of apprehension about almost anything that I'm performing now, from making this video to making coffee, where coffee was like the least acceptable ingredient to increase a sense of mental volatility, or a heightening, right? You add caffeine or you add a stimulant, and so that takes your physiology up a notch, right? And then these additional stimulants do all sorts of things, additional chemicals and intoxicants. Anything that I say is like I don't know, you could say a piece of cooked chicken in a way has intoxicants on it. But it'd be weird to call it intoxicants. Like, to intoxicate the body is to live, let's say, almost anything that stimulates the part of the physiology, right? But in this particular case, I'm speaking about intoxicants of the mind, frequencies of the mind. But I also had this kind of coming into grips with the persistence of my being, the persistence of this channel, the persistence of art, the awareness that everything matters, right? That everything I do is lined up in the minutia of cause and effects. And the psychology of stepping back, observing one's position, one's world, and then finding that there needs to be a type of advancement or reorientation, a reappropriation of oneself relative to one's life, relative to one's community. I think I was just having another one of those moments that appear periodically throughout my particular lifespan. And I realized, not just through a friend of mine who was upset at me for the malicious behavior, I suppose, on my part, and I kind of might be able to go into that because this might function as a type of confessional. But it was this awareness of my, but basically how I've allowed my soul and my behavior to persist in matters that describe my being to myself, to that which is above and beyond and uncalcifiable, if you will, via the word. Mainly a god or godhead type of thing. Oh, excuse me. Oh, hey, what was your ETA on? I didn't know if you were going to take straight off out of when you got off of work. I didn't even know if you were here. I thought, like, oh, it came in and took off. But anyway, I was only asking because I didn't know. Okay.
No, my flight's at 2.
Oh.
So I don't have time to leave.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Because I have to fight side down and then park long term, park and ride, or what lift.
Yeah, you could just take a lift, and then if you wanted, you could. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'd say pull in there because it'd be safe. It's a little bit contentious in terms. I don't think they're going to be towing anybody out of my spot because of the lawsuit. But if you took the spot, it would probably be safe if you felt like you wanted to do that, or the street and or on park. I'm just saying it's an open option.
Okay.
Cool. I'll try to.
Yeah, that's all. I put this shit off, man. That's the stuff I'm doing now. I got an audition coming up and I need headshots.
Oh, really?
I was gonna order some bulk, but they wouldn't be here in time, and it's an old photograph, so I decided I'm not gonna do bulk until I get new ones. So I bought a printer, so I print out. Would headshots?
Oh, I didn't know what you meant by bulk, like bulk headshots, like a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Oh.
I can get like 100 for like $50, $60 or something like that. $70, maybe 100. Yeah.
Well, okay.
So so I've been getting that set up because I gotta have that when I get back. I have to really get on that and get some decent photographs printed up.
Right on.
Anyway, man, I imagine since it's Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I'm probably gonna try to hit the airport no later than noon.
Well, I always get there. I've been conditioned to get there two hours ahead of time, but choose your own adventure on that one. It's a pretty straightforward airport. I mean, you've used it.
So I like the busiest day of the year, pretty much.
Oh.
For flight
Oh.
for Thanksgiving.
See, that's the thing. I'm in my own head. I'm not even
It's like, what the fuck? Why did I choose today?
Right.
At least I'm only flying 45 minutes. You know?
Yeah, short one. Right on. Okay.
Well. Okay. So what I'm saying is that I had basically reconsiderations of my historic, not only symbol set, but my personality. My when I say personality, I mean to imbue that with the term soul, right? One's personage, and so that the idea of what it means to perpetuate in a genre of persistence. The genre of persistence seems to grant over a type of expectation within a community of what your personality has or is. I shouldn't say is, but there's a general sense of consistency that has general sense of variability, and everybody has kind of an entropic vision of everyone in development, in growth, in process. By process, I mean process of evolution, process of change, right? But there is always this self-reflection that, especially with the maintenance of art forms and habituation, right, that has a type of persistence, not just to one's community, but to where one believes they sit relative to them, their world, them in community, them to themselves, and themselves to the greater being, or the Godhead, if you will. That which is inexplicable, that seemingly allows for all of every single human's life to be accepted as part of like the global family of organisms, right? That every living organism is contemporaneous to every other living organism. And so it's finding out what one is doing as a type of persistence, not necessarily like my what I ended up finding out about myself yesterday was I ran over all that I was producing that I was really upset by, like that I was upset to find out that this friend was an ex-girlfriend. Always felt as if I had something like malicious up my sleeve, like I was hiding something, hiding something. And she felt like I was a therapist. She was reminding me of Hannibal Lecter. And I was painting a clown with 6 fingers, and she says, well, Hannibal Lecter has 6 fingers. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. But for some reason, she thought that I was doing something like a performative, malicious, or secret behavior. I had a hidden agenda, that somehow my agenda was directly a part of her fear, right? And then this also seemed to be a prevalent iteration that other people had for me when I would go on these travels and I'd meet people from YouTube. There was a degree of fear in them that because because I'm off the reservation, so to speak. I like the term saying I'm off the reservation, meaning I'm not your run-of-the-mill guy. I believe everybody is very different from one another, but there's kind of a standard zeitgeist or paradigm of living in the modern day within, workaday class structure and kind of a direction or orientation of a hierarchy of, like the homeless, the plebes, the migrant workers, then you got the American citizens, and then you got those on welfares and those on that are normally the workaday 40-hour work week I mean, you have and then you have the supervisors and managers within these systems, and then you have people that retire out of the system at different ages that attempt to retire early. Then you have people that retire or they maintain this type of ethic. And then you have the very upper crust. You could take the Elon Musks or the Bill Gates or the Bezos, and they're still active. They're still churning. Well, I don't know so much about Bill Gates, right? But you take these higher end, like Warren Buffett types, but then they're just kind of cherry picking a displacement of their historic artifacts as information to the youth, or to whomever will listen. And anyway, but somehow when I say that I'm off the reservation, it doesn't mean that I'm not a part of that complex of hierarchy. It's just that I'm dividing the hierarchy, or my perspective on it is sliced differently, or I'm reorienting my vision of how the hierarchy is moving. And somehow certain people seem to think that the way in which one orients their universe, that it basically, like, you could see, like, let's say, okay, the radical Antifa left or the fascist claimed right to the right kind of attempting to standardize their relationship to the community and nation is over here, right? Kind of a conservative reapproach to liberal talking points over here. You have all different spotting individuals showing up all over the net. But then you have on the left, you have more of this entailment of individual aspects of freedom that are formulating, they're coalescing into something that looks like a group that takes on a particular sort of neo-leftism. And it's not like there weren't historic attributes, all through at least American history and perhaps in the maintenance of Western culture. But because these pockets are still developed, it's interesting to force one to grant themselves a positioning within these paradigms, an evolving or shifting position within these paradigms, sociopolitically, but not interpersonally, right? The sociopolitical description and orientation, as far as I'm concerned, I cherry pick through it, I migrate through it, meaning I feel like I'm investigatory to what is going on, and yet it's all fed via other people's simulations, their edits of events that are going on with a particular focus. Like, every time you look at a video, realize that these videos are occurring generally in isolation, and that we're being pocketed. We're being thrown into these pockets of extremities, if you will, or examples of extremities. You can find a mundane discourse on things as well. But anyway, so yesterday it was more, for me, I had gathered this sense of my impassioned self in the world, a sense of impassionment. I was drawn, and I had gone into the day with this sense that my body and my thoughts would overwhelm my intellect. And by doing that, really, I think what I was doing is I was refocusing upon my aesthetic attributes, my attributing my artwork to the community. And then it was a dropping of the veils, so to speak, of categorization amongst diffuse and discrete categories. It was not just cherry picking, it was a sense, kind of more of I generally don't use the word holistic, but this holistic bonding, like a resonance to the whole that refocused back on not just me, but my behavior, and then my position relative to my art form. Thou shalt art in heaven, right? Where art is a verb in some cases, right? Thou shalt art in heaven. But if what I'm doing in heaven is creating twisting rubber band people that are developing an aesthetic that is less than formulated, less than well categorized, less than that which is rational, right? And working on kind of a defoundational approach, almost to, the phrase pulling a rug out from underneath somebody to shore up a rug underneath myself as a type of foundation to grant it not just name, but grant it form. But I'm only granting it form through clumps of artifacts. This painting here, this kind of book here, this kind of distribution of things that destabilize the foundations. And it's almost like I feel like I'm a part of a tumbling process, but I'm trying to reel back or yank out of the universe, like fish from it, to pull a net out of the ocean. But first I need to recognize the ground as an ocean, and then go shark hunting, so to speak, or go fishing, or something to that effect. And so there's different ways. I mean, put it this way, I might use a term like there's different ways to skin a cat, as if other people's objective is cat skinning. And my alluding to that idea is it's more or less the dissatisfaction that I found with my being was my embrace of, let's say, the emo or a dark side or an undercutting side or something that might maintain a type of malicious-esque darkness, something pulpish, something that puts on a simulation of something threatening. And I realized perhaps I had been doing that as a type of protectionism my whole life. First, it was protections against, me relative to my own family, trying to find my place relative to the controls of my parents and, as they're trying to raise children, right? And then it's relational protections relative to, I had mentioned, teenage girl molestation of young boys type of thing, as a historic event. But then it was protection against one's unclear ideology relative to the mobbish sort of controls, the civic controls of the LDS population, right? That the family defined itself as necessarily not of that group, but we were fractured with types of non-identity, religious identities, to, in one way, combat theologically the onslaught of the group religious mentality. So there was a type of defense process, clarification that was coming through there. But I was fine with all this, and I shouldn't call it defense, because to me these were just like sparring exercises, right? Someone throws a punch, you just spar it, right? Boom, boom. And so there is, anyway, so there was this idea of sparring against one's world, but as a youth, I had a type of vigor and metabolism, and from early childhood, where the very vigor of being alive allowed one to get through everything. And then the chunks of existential facts and despair, and kind of like the defoundational process, when your life starts to defound itself about you, right? Because things can become fractious, and they're punctuated fractures. The edges become very clear. These events become very clear. and then how one postures themselves in terms of lacks of empathy and consideration about these edges becomes, I'm not quite certain how to describe it, other than it's not mere metabolism. I'm not saying that people that are young don't have these punctuated events. I think that depending on their levels of support in their community, every individual differs, right? Like if you're an orphan, so to speak, then you might be, and somebody you care about dies, or you have to move, or there's just some major calamity. That's a different type of historic childhood than somebody that has, 5 siblings and 50 cousins and 3 generations around them, and there's this level of like inclusive intra support, and then that will have a different the individual's relationship to that community can have some volatile problems within, but the network itself, like having a bunch of spiders all intertwined and networked together, right? Basically, what had happened to me yesterday was this sense that I had put on a persona of a spider. I was behaving as such, and my artifacts were a distribution of a haunt, not just back to myself, but as a claim of my path. I like the word pathos, right? Even though that's more psychological. My path, my mythic path structure. By mythic, I mean that which the aesthetic is inviting that one could parallel to anything historic, symbolic, or any iconography, right? So my path of artifacts had led to the production of this simulation, where the simulation then of my own creation, including all of my life, that there was a sense of I'm trapped within it, but I can relieve myself of it. And then the whole thing was about a discontent, an emotional discombobulation, such that I needed to thrust it away, hide it away, tomb it, bury it, end it, and then reorganize, reassess my engagement, kind of like a redefinitional spot, right? At this age, though, where bodies metabolism is slowed down, but calamity and history of how one deals with problems, like the real problems in their life, right? They have to deal with it first, brass tacks, get something done for survivability's sake, and then everything levels upon that. And people that are more aged can either become, depending on how they're, like if they're raising kids, or that's different in terms of their orientation of perspective and protectionism, than somebody that doesn't have kids, someone that takes on, and I use kids specifically, right? Because you can develop a different sort of protectionism for older folks, or for community, for abstract groups or groupings. Like I feel in a way connected with the people whom I've connected most at greater lengths of time with. Anyway, but my point is that people that are more in isolation, they're more independent, and they can have what I think is a war faction, that kind of comes, like I was thinking of like Mel Gibson's buddy, his big ogre buddy that was kind of bald in Braveheart, that he is, his dad is dying, his friend's dad is dying, and the dad is saying, "Son, I couldn't have been more proud of you." And here's this big ogre son with, older son that's warring, that just has this like amassed, like Viking-esque, I mean, granted it's Scottish, but this overpowering ability to take their historic knowledge up and beyond with such a gravity to it, up and beyond the mere games of those who are adolescent, because there's been more time for fossilization, constriction, but fossilization of historic paths of trauma and dealing, right? Such that you want people who are older and viable to be in the ring. But by in the ring, you're implying either a competition or a war, a test or a war. And then I was, since I'm painting, I have this figure aspect. It's like, okay, I'm positing a historic me as an angelic force that's defounding not only my physiology and my feet, but I'm disrupting. Like, I'm trying to both allow the darkness to come all the way into my soul and then exculpate it, to exhume it from myself. And so it's just kind of weird for me when that feels like what it is my kata is, my internal aesthetic art kata, or how I trend symbolically to manifest. And yet the end result of that is that I don't want it to manifest in terms of a certain type of persistence, meaning the direction of that was not the telos that I wanted my dart to throw. It's not the tomahawk swinging and hitting what it is I wanted it to fly and hit. Like, I've already made the targets of the thing. Like, the war is over for this unknown soldier, but as I become more known, the war continues. And then it's not so much a war. And then we're talking into philosophical notions of one's will and the evil aspects of attempting to garner that which one desires via one's will becomes emblematic of that which one needs to negate. So there's this balancing beam between, like, for me, I subsist. I get along with a base subsistence. I'm producing work, but even the self-correction relative to my will to produce a sort of aesthetic, even what is yielded within the aesthetic, becomes problematic because I'm producing that which is a haunt, or that which is icons and symbols historically that place oneself as prey to oneself. Right? I'm haunting myself as another. I'm haunting myself as another. Right? And so it's more like, okay, I've done this genre, and I know there's some painters out there. This fella Czar, he there's a lot of painters that have no problem with this. They don't have a sense that they need some sort of cocooning or protectionism, and all they'll do is produce and laud icons of horror. They'll produce horror show, and then they'll produce icons of mayhem. It's like their own type of therapy. And so I think what was happening with me yesterday was just this huge discontentment had wafted in again, with a sense that I needed to will myself to de-impassion. Like this morning, I'm going to be painting again, but I'm only able to do so because I've taken away my passions towards what it is I'm producing. And because I'm going at it with the sense, like, meaning I've placated the passions. I've placated the passions, and I'm approaching if you guys haven't noticed, I generally approach my videos and my time spent lately without music. I might have an intro of music. Can't take it. Not there, even though it's morning. Anyway, and so and I'm not even certain. This is just like a journal entry, right? But it's me trying to get a grip upon a preference for that which is not music. Like music is a type of separation off of the intellect, off of the pragmatic statements of philosophy as they reflect one's theological positions as like a historic para justification to one's world, right? And so essentially what everything seems to boil down to with me, and what I really learned yesterday, was that if I put up the simulation too long of being immoral, and what does stem from my brush, from my activity, yields a type of I'll almost say immoral, a breach of levels of efficacy, right? And to realize that, in the like even from Bosch, there's artists from trying to think of the name of this triptych that has like a bunch of very surreal elements within it that are very, very detailed. And right now I'm moving too much imagery and then losing who the painter is. I wanted to say Bosch. Earthly Delights. Something about Earthly Delights. Garden of Earthly Delights. So you can take something that is a type of twisted surrealism and displacement of aspects that echo one's psychology within the landscape of their whole universe. And then this subsided for some time, where these were not lauded artistic instruments. You had whole, cathedrals and orientations and commissions to holier depictions, meaning you're not looking at the grotesque. You might look at shame and you look at a type of horror. If there are grotesque elements, they're more in like day-to-day pragmatic savagery of killing a rabbit or slaughtering someone at war. But it's not a bounded, twisted disreality. It's not the aesthetic of that which is counterfactual to the referent world, right? And so since it's not now you have counterfactual representation, and that counterfactual representation has a mode of reflection in people's psychology. And then it itself, like surrealism, I think, is what kind of helps coat an ethic for, let's say, geneticists that are working on mutating animals together, right? So let's make hybrids of monkeys and humans and elephants and lions and tomatoes and with spider bits in it, or whatever it is that's not only in our food supply that is possible and probably happening within labs, government labs and facilities, probably globally. And then what it means to, take a surreal form of art that has no referent, that's counterfactual, and use that as an ethical coding for something of a type of belief that which is the overarching consistency that has names such as God, that is ethereal and non-definitive, it grants it another realm of possibility that the universe allows to occur. And so basically, once I said, to boil this down, I was feeling immoral. I was feeling like what I was doing was a perpetuation of immorality. and my efficacy, my personal efficacy to my universe was at threat. And it was a threat because I was over impassioned, but not just my being over impassioned. It is, what is it that I'm doing? And then there's that sense of, is everybody in? Is everybody in? The show is about to begin, and it's this idea then that, like, through this Doors auditorium of everyone's in, there's no escaping here, like in Natural Born Killers, right? Like there's this idea of, no one gets out here live. So there's this boxed structure and this drive, like a mental drive for people either to escape in technology, escape within their little pockets of lives. And then there's that desire to escape the planet, to leave the planet, to leave the whole paradigm, to mirror and parallel that which must be an extension and extruding towards God, to become alien or identify with aliens, right? That type of thing. And humanity developing a space military. I was like, do you guys really think the space military is to protect our assets against Russians or Chinese? I thought, well, that's fine. But if you guys are still of the opinion that we're not imparted, I want to say, other dimensional. See, this is where most people, I can lose the audience at this point. But to me, I mean, my epistemology rests on a metaphor of being something like a pebble within an aquarium, where there's a great deal of Elohim or teams of other types of pluralistic energies, where different single or coupled energies have interest within us, bound within technological infusions of data sets, right? From sounds, the facts of sounds, the facts of datum. Even this video is a type of immorality. It's under the dospook channel. I had lauded the dospook channel as a type of destruction. Even the persistence of what I'm doing, in as much as I paint virtue within process, it's like the overall effect of what I'm doing might be akin to something like fracking or developing mining caves. Leave a mountain in desolation internally because you've gone in to gut it. So the virtue then becomes pocketed. The shadows become elemental upon one's reflection. One's positioning about their lives takes on a type of morality. And I still have not had offspring. So the fact that I have no seeded future devalues me, and it displaces my energies towards other up-and-coming humans that I grant care to, that are not my own, but start out with a relative, a blood relative basis, and then extend out, through marriage and networks. And so there's still, then there's the reflection on my history relative to abortion at 20, which I had invited, meaning because I wasn't prepared for a child at that state. And to me, I was taking a very hey, whatever, this can happen a million times kind of approach. And I don't garner much sympathy to a fetus any more than I would if I found out a canker in my mouth that I yanked out was actually a fetus, right? Like, the potential for human life is amazing. But the episode of that particular cellular death, I don't think at its, within a 3-week stage, so to speak, was problematic in terms of my empathy towards a child. It was more about the possibility of a flowering soul abounding. and how one maps and works with and details and then yields this child, and then the child's relationship to the parent, and when the parent steps back away from the child. All of these things are like a displacement of one's half being into the world. The shared combinatorial being with someone of the opposite sex that then has yielded your being into the world. It's like, since I don't have that, it puts me, I guess that helps me step off of the reservation mentally more, such that people that have that sensibility, and I'm not overarchingly saying necessarily, I'm just saying generally parents have a certain sensibility of appreciation and protection of their child, and love for their children, obviously, that for me only functions in what do you call it? We call it living vicariousness. And so to me, it remains as abstract. And I think like parents that are removed from their children's lives, they can re-enter kind of a, like if it, natural growth, if your children are adults, you let it go and then you re-find yourself, I would imagine. But if you're ostracized legally or otherwise from a child, then there's kind of an abstract disjunct that comes in as a form of neuroses that develops its own pathology within the minds of the individuals that are ostracized, such that they are within this antimonious kind of self-contradictory fighting dissonance with themselves, right? And so then they partition that away from the social discord. They don't want to look at it, meaning they need to look at it. It may be their shadow, and some people may guide them to that. And that's how I offended my ex, who's a friend, is that I kept pointing to this disjunct that she had. And she told me up front, like, hey, I don't want to talk about that. And then she pinned me as, you're kind of like a therapist. Like, I feel like I'm in a psychiatry session. And then I felt something like cold and basil, this, I don't know, something clinical and like a type of plant that is like a bramble vine as opposed to a fruit, like a bramble vine with thorns yielding little bitty berries, little bitty like blackberries or sour berries or something, berries that are painful to get, as opposed to like the yield of a watermelon or a big tomato or something else that is not, or like an orange, that type of thing. It's like that type of soul. And then it just, the thing that I can't get out of is that as I'm soul searching, still orienting my spirit over time, it has to do with how I'm moving objects in space. It has to do with how I'm moving aesthetics. It has to do with what it is I'm performing, and then what it is I feel I need to either cease performing or iterate a huge stylistic kind of a re-encumbering, I don't know, like a type of polishing what I have, not by polishing what it is I have as a history, but polishing what it is I have as a future, ingratiating the work that I have in an attempt to genetically respeciate this almost like vine species that I seem like, I guess I'm mirroring to the world, that it itself has this particular strand of haunt to it. And then it is interesting to see where people like bound themselves within philosophical genres. So they make certain they have the lingo, or medical genre, or any genres to make certain there's a certain lingual boundary. But then the general colloquial, vernacularly based day-to-day human often is reiterating off of media and history. Like, I'll reference Amy, what's her nuts, right? That I was playing at the beginning, Winehouse, with the name Winehouse. My last name is Fail, and then I'm dospook. Like a dospook program, I got Barklord typing to me. I have someone named Vladimir typing to me. I have these names that echo these things, and then the coincidences, right? The coincidences that abound, right? I just shot off this red man and with a target on him, and then I logged into Facebook, and there was my childhood friend throwing hatchets at a target. And on my red man, my devilish figure, I have a target on his leg. I have a few targets here, and it's just this confirmation bias. It goes beyond confirmation bias of coincidence, right? But my point, though, to backstep, take 2 steps back and waltz through this Matilda of a video, right, is that people echo off of their enculturated artifacts via movies and propaganda, often within music, within these different sub pockets. And so they oftentimes find something of the bantering within a genre of like just philosophical lingo, kind of in itself sterile, informational. And I guess I found a hyper value in the extraction of the passions to bring once again something sterile with a disgust and a displeasure towards my own imprint. Then the other thing that was upsetting was that I've been healing for a very long time from destabilizing my body, my physiology, by busting my feet, right? And so my spine being busted 3 times in life, my feet being busted worked on at least 3 times. And now the pain levels are in a different oscillatory pattern in that they subside for a great deal of time, and then they come into a heavy burn, like, and a heavy, there can be very like pounding, just these distinctions of different type orders of pain and the frequency that they occur and where they're occurring within the body, and then my tolerance of them. And then it brings back that masochistic drive that informs what it means to walk through or walk on coals. But then the whole structure of my physiological, my feet's, my feet's, I'm trying to put an apostrophe there. My feet's possessive, right? My feet's relationship to my ankles, and then the ankle's relationship to my gait, my stride, busts out my hip. It blows out my hip. So now I'm treating my hip, right? And so my stride is different. My gait is different. My persona is different. Okay, that being said, now it's time to move over to plugging in and painting and perhaps even reading a couple of these comments and maybe speaking a little bit more about what it is I'm doing. I had a big blowout yesterday. Well, 2 days ago, right? Meaning I had an outlet start to spark, right? It was about ready to kick into an electrical fire. And and I was about ready to pay an electrician to come out. Had ordered one up. They couldn't get out till Friday. Then they called me saying they could come out yesterday. And I thought, I just kicked a breaker, but these are old breakers, and I haven't replaced a breaker of this sort ever in this condo in the many years. And so it was interesting, the limits of, even the idea between what a breaker and a fuse was, between how to deal with electrical fires, to working with silver wiring as opposed to copper wiring in a in a structure that was built in late 1969, finishing in 70, right? And then and then anyway, so my ex-girlfriend friend shows up, and she helps me. She had an old house herself, and she basically, because I can't drive anymore legally, right? I'm suspended. She took me to the store. I canceled the appointment with the electrician. Instead of paying them $70 just to come out, plus these other things, I think I spent $8 and then a few dollars on some onion rings, and we came back, and with simple know-how and make do, we cured that thing, which was kind of interesting. Anyway, so yesterday started out very well put together with her, very well meaning. There was a bit of this flirtation thing. She and I oscillate. I oscillate with women in general with this sense of, where I'm attracted or how I'm attracted. So I have this like this urge, this weird non-sexual urge to like grab her, like to not it's not a molestation, but it's like a flirtation with the body. Like I make certain, like I like to touch. Here's your arm. Here's this. Hey, is it okay if I bonk your boob? Right? Like you have to ask, because it's more like this ass grab thing, right? And it's not even meant to be negative, because I'm explaining to her. I said, well, of all the women I know, and I know of many, I interact with several, there's the actual libido, the actual erection, the arousal, the physiological arousal either comes up when I'm in the thrust of actually sexual process, or with some women, just their mere presence, I'll just start popping a boner. And so when I classify my relationship, my libido that way relative to women, it's almost like, oh, my penis is my witching stick, and that's who I should be with, or something stupid like that might come to mind, right? Anyway, even this topic is something that I think is almost immoral, right? So then these become the big quests, big problematic quests. Let's see. So for Vladimir mentions, hi, Mike. I love you, and you've been doing okay-ish. Please watch. Let me do this. Let's see. Expand that. Please watch Chris Langan's interview with Spike Jones. Oh yeah, see, now I read Christopher Michael Langan a lot, or not a lot, but his write-up, and he was interesting to me because he had this idea of what he almost like this manifold of one's echo to the universe, that you're always within it. It's always echoing back to you. That words meaning, one's being has some sort of outbound latitude that has a resonance to it, is kind of how I conceptualized what it is he was saying. And it kind of lined up with like Wittgenstein had lined up a triptych of like words, life, and meaning all matching, right? And I think as the internet brings people together, there is more of this idea of empathies with others, and like people deal with things and a more of a compressive level. We're able to garner information. And I believe people's IQ, their bandwidth, can be extensive as far as what they're taking in. You could say the idea of an intelligence quotient as somehow echoing one, and I like the frame bandwidth of data collection or organization, seems to come about. And then you get the minds that retain a type of fracture, and this is before I go through the rest of your comments, but thank you, Vladimir. So there's this type of like this lady friend of mine. She's very fractured in her dialogue. And I had been very fractured in what other people were. It was appearing to be a type of a word salad, right? So if you said that the ends of the fingers are all topics and that they're all moving about, right? And that you can't, when somebody's speaking and you think that they're moving, it's too chaotic in what it is they're saying, right? You can't see how this topic, even though it's mingling with these other topics, are rooted to this as a general genre, right? And so it appears as if there's this salad, right? And that's why I say, look, just because you cannot pick up what I'm laying down does not mean that there's not a sensibility to what I'm saying. It also doesn't mean, like, because you're incapable of picking up what I'm laying down, word-wise, boom, laying my cards. Now the tips of the fingers are cards on the table, right? Because you can't pick it up doesn't mean that there's nothing there to be picked up within a fashion, within one's ability to ornate, to pick up the data set and find it probably more meaningful than people that believe it to just be scat. Anyway, okay, so this still isn't where I necessarily wanted to go on the video, but who knows where this is. Okay, I will look that Langan video up. That'd be great. I'm coming back to Discord in 2019. Oh, you missed the Tom Redan. Nice, esteemed God. Yeah, I was just the other day. Well, just yesterday, same woman. We were going through Discord, and I said, "Now here you can go to this other political server, and here's all of these people and all these." Sub channels within this other server, but I said they're all a bit foreign to me. I said, now let's move over to this one, whom you described, and I said, now these are more who I'm used to. Like, this is kind of the group that I'm moving with, right? Even though they jump from like the Nadia ship and the there was like Amendum and the White Owl Old Guard group I was involved in before the Nadia hangs, before those got moved over to Discord and distributed Krillism and Tomer. But I was just pointing back to this online community. And then there's the whole network with even Barklord and such, in Puro and Amendum, and like even like this weird, Azrianok and Bubonic Nate and Steve Ernst, and just this weird, even older YouTubing network that has its own gravity to me as like a pocketed genre of networked people that are engaged within this other new pocketing networks. And so at some point, there's several ideas on my mind. At first, it was to backstep through it, is that idea of reaching a silence. That I find a comfort in speaking things and hearing things, and that silence is upsetting because I'll find informational data that is that comes out of my empirical world that I will grant over meaning to, as if I'm being something is asking me to do something. And my clarity is found within kind of an ignorance of that, or a type of intoxication as to stop one's dealing with silence or what comes of that, even though so much must necessarily be relearned about embracing silence. Beyond that, what might make what I said also word salad is when the speaker, like myself, loses track of the dots. Right. So my metaphor, back to dots, and my metaphor of the hatchet. Right. So here we go. Here, as you can see, I got this devilish figure, right? And there's a dartboard on his leg. It's like a target, right? You go to this weird chicken thing here. I got this target on its beak, right? And I'm not certain where that was coming from. This lady here, it's not a target. It was like a blush that I moved into a heart space. And this ominous figure behind this angelic-esque figure, I thought, oh, okay, that to me is a type of haunt. And what is the point of generating the shadow of the haunt? Like I said, even the persistence of my generating these things becomes problematic. But so it was interesting to me that I painted this with a dartboard, and immediately upon posting it, a video came to me of a friend who is always very red in complexion and throwing a hatchet at a dartboard and having it stick. Right. And so the madness and how the to inform younger people or other generations epistemology, there's several people here that are very good at it. I'm not certain of what some people certainly can relate to me more than they could follow these other individuals that I will say have a crisper and a greater aptitude of description, and they have a furtherance of naming that is brought upon by accepting less Western descriptions, meaning if you read Eastern philosophies, the idea of formulating the space between one's desire, willing to it, and then a retraction from that desire, apparently there's a name for that retraction in a religious context. And I don't have that name. So I walk around it. I've heard the name. I've heard the name of that space. But then you're left with ideas of will, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, the idea of willing to, what it all means. And that's why I do like people that can speak on these things. And part of this video was going to be an analysis of Eric Aarvol's On Truth video, because I believe he's however he's put together, whether you want to believe intelligence is intrinsic, conditioned, educated in, or whatnot, he appears to have the bandwidth to take on a genre and flesh out many details about things. So I put him at a well-ordered intelligence with a high bandwidth, and his applicability to describing things comes out of left field. And by left field, I just mean that as once again a common phrase, just meaning from a different direction. Because I keep thinking, like, whatever the retention of this video is for future people, right? Whatever retention of the video is as something someone could stumble across much later on, there would be something akin to listening to a 1920s theater show where they might use the phrase as emphasis, and how, oh darling, just these weird, like, historic things, like the English now might say taking the piss. They'll take the piss out of them, or they're taking the piss from this person, right? And it's got its own meanings, but in some way now, even when I'm writing, anytime there's like even the term and like, right, I might want to put in quotes, something that is of a particular generation or maybe just a few generations word usage. I guess they're just general colloquialisms. But anyway, the whole point is that there's something foreign about it that's accepted, and then things are reinterpreted. I'm having a real hard time with all sorts of things because I'm not certain of what reinterpretability means. Meaning, I didn't like a foundational disjunct to myself that questioned the wholeness of everything that it is I am doing to a root level such that upon peering at my aged self aging more, I want to steer the ship differently. Right? There's this song like, I rowed my boat upon the shore. I threw my oars, I threw my oars out or away because I didn't know what I was fighting for. And I don't know if that's the Eagles or who sung that, but rowed my boat upon the shore and threw away the oars because I forgot what I was fighting for, and like it was all like coming back. And so anyway, in other words, I've already gone through this weird born again spirit bounding, like an antithesis to the analogic, where everything, whether or not it was biochemical material or not, took on a digital atomization such that there was a type of new degree of freedom that opened up, not just in social process, but within my relationship to gravity, or my relationship to physics, or my relationship to possibility of movement, with a certain degree of faith that that faith itself was like a digital artifact that was also coming down, so such that I might have something like this. Like this creature is coming to attack. And I thought this might be like an outbound salvation character. And then I just had to reorient the piece for, in a way, a sense of protectionism. But just the problem with willing into something that is less than serene, less than sterile, beauty and sterility, or more than sterile, right? Dynamic and dramatic, like a video game or like a movie. Like the concept artist can draw all sorts of stuff that has a warlike feature, but a modern day movie has hundreds of people working on bits of it. So they might think they're contributors to an idea, but they have that displacement away from the end product. The individual, me, moving something from concept to end is all on me. And then the weight of that becomes problematic. So in one way, yesterday was me taking the piss out of myself, or giving myself some piss, or something like that. Maybe I should finish reading your comments here. Okay, what do I have? Okay. Oh, and 417 is cool. She's nice, but Shani. See, I don't know much about Shanny. Oh, he's then taken off. Also, I just remembered. Oh yeah, Shamos. Shamos has been on a huge rant lately. Even I couldn't get around Shamos because he's just delivering toxin. Like he's smearing. He's like demanding the world accept him as he is in his position and his justifications, and he doesn't want to push back. And if I pulled up Discord right now, he might certainly be yelling, but because he's been on one. Heroin Church from Rhonda and heroin. I was hilariously trading apples for oranges. Bye, much love from Australia. Cheers, mate. Oh, I understand a minimum imperial now terrify him and had nightmares, but I'm okay. I have met with enough psychopaths to cope with it. Peace. Right. So back to that, like how to deal with something like, here's my six-fingered Hannibal-esque clown. This is an old depiction of me the way I used to dress when I was a swimmer, right? This is me landing on the ground post-jump. I'm fracturing the ground, but really that's metaphor for me fracturing my feet. And I give myself an angelic status, not a devilish status. I've given myself, like Beck would say, a devilish haircut in my mind, several times, I believe, to be an adult human and actively propagate anything that you find paradoxically damaging, like a zero-sum game of wealth, or contributing, like the idea, once again, of if you're vegetarian, you have an ethic against killing animals, and you go into a grocery store and you buy rice and vegan food, and you pay a tax for that. The profit margin for that is still a type of sustaining of the store and the store's incorporation with meat slaughter, right? So that you're complicit within the system by participating within the system. Hence, the system, regardless of your attempts, you can point to it as that which is outside, trying to stave oneself off as a distinct delineation away from. But participation, right, is asked for. Then you get people like me that then fully give over everything to the darkness in terms of art, or in terms of consumption, or in terms of letting one's levee break into all that is negative, go swim in this oil swamp or something like that, right? Uh, and this is an aesthetic thing, not necessarily a political thing. But much like women now, like a lot of the movement where women are trying to shore up, splash a greater wave of their wails and their discontentment across as much as they can and as loudly as they can, as a claim relative to a power that they conceive, as much as people are granting hierarchies but denying that the left has appropriate wailings to said hierarchy or conceived hierarchy. The right tries to either readjust what the hierarchy is, grant it components, and then dismiss it as valuable at first, so it should be maintained and focused on, seen as a value, and then dissuaded from people throwing rocks at this pyramid, at this hierarchical pyramid that is, I won't call it systemic as much as I'll call it endemic. We have an endemic pyramid. I don't believe I am privileged specifically, meaning I am also privileged, but I like the idea of saying if groups have a preference towards something, it's because that individual or group or anything is preferenced. So instead of systemic, it's endemic. Instead of privileged, it's preferenced. My point, though, is that the wails and the cries of all of those discontented, I believe those discontents are relative to law structure and a belief of desiring more well-being for themselves and their groups. And it is about outcome, but that the wails themselves should take on a huge fever pitch of a wave, like a tidal wave, that topple over and beyond the rational shoreline, right? Meaning that there is a type of feminist-esque or leftist type of defensive war that's gone on that is really defending a type of ambient modality of being that has secured so many people that we call a Western value. And yet on the right, they're saying these people are going beyond it. But there was something of a protectionism against the avant-garde, the surreal, or what's wrongly named so often as the postmodern. I despise this perpetuation that postmodernism is not readable, understandable, scalable, that the dissection of the lingual and the graphic reference relative to the signified of the mind, the mental image, such that one grants over the non-fixed mental image, meaning I can't compare my subjective to your subjective. we can only represent that, whether we're in a virtual reality or not, until there's neuro mappings that go on that are happening exactly, and we grant over the idea that whatever our signified is as ephemeral or blurry or as crisp and discrete it is, or fleeting, or fleeting, or whatever it takes on. The signified is not fixed relative to the reference, the sign outward, whether it's a lingual or a grapheme-esque sign, or whether or not it's just a sound that one interprets as having a meaning, like listening to a foreigner's discussion and perhaps believing them clearing their throat was a type of process within that language that had meaning, that type of thing, such that you as a foreigner to the language might ascribe sort of a type of signification, a significance to the significant, a significance to the sign. And so anyway, I like the idea of, the sign signified and referent, even though other people are, cutting things up. But the whole idea that postmodernism and Derrida is necessarily attached to Marxism is already not founded by his own work. He granted it's like people talking about Taylor Swift now instead of about even James Earl Jones, like a decade, 2 decades ago, or let's say Elvis way back when, or let's say Lincoln or McKinley. Like, when was the last time you heard people like really make a big deal about the President McKinley? Speak on it, right? He's not a referent that's contemporaneous, and so the idea that we're scaling through these fixations of you have a mental prowess and you scale it, but this notion that because somebody takes a stage and a high level of stage, such as the dark web of the modern intellectual, like the Eric Weinstein or the Sam Harris or the Jordan Peterson, or whatever that group is that's kind of developing this overarching imprint and that's starting to feed things, is just kind of cursorily attached postmodernism with Marxism, such that even critiques of Marxism and the labor theory of value and the components of the labor theory of value do not have a sophisticated treatment by most. They're not looking at Marx's relationship to capitalism. They're not looking at him describing a shift of focus of value. They're simply then taking a history of Marxism and Stalinism and Leninism and Trotskyism or whatnot, whatever their perceived ideological frame is, then they're conflating that over modern governments of modern socialistic things. And then there's an argument, like I like to argue, that socialism and capitalism have been intertwined necessarily within, let's say, the US, meaning you've never had capitalism per se post-feudalism that hasn't existed with some social framing, some social process. It's only when you get to this distinct notion of socialism, that you're trying to favor the shoring up the preference to go towards greater social controls. But then you'll run into the antimony and the paradox and the problems with how that is shored up. Like I said, the whales of the left, the feminists on the left, they're splashing whales of discontentment need to go above and beyond the declared rational shoreline, such as to cause others to identify with their discontents and then have it backtrack, right? Then have it come back and settle. And so the battle that's occurring and the claims that are occurring, I don't think are appropriate, right? And so this idea that postmodern means Marxism, and Marxism means something akin to the horrors that occurred in under Stalin, Lenin, and the whole Soviet thing. I'm not saying there's nothing to that. I'm just saying that the idea that Derrida, extracting Foucault here, right? Because I'm not well read on Foucault at all, and I think I'm very focused narrowly on specific works of Derrida, and not like I'm no scholar of Derrida, right? But I've read enough of his work and have really attempted to pierce it, that I'm not finding that any terms that he was bringing to bear are actually being used appropriately. And so that people can say, because he's not understandable in their mind, we'll just name it this, and then we'll paste a stamp label and say that it's an awful. We'll scapegoat it for modern problems, contemporaneous problems. We'll scapegoat this group, and any sophisticated scholar of Derrida would in fact realize, like even Derrida himself wrote a book, not just a compendium on Marx, and that particular book, I've read a little bit of that one, because that's one to get into, right? But it's almost like a type of the reason I bring it up is because even if he writes about Marxism explicitly as an exposition, Derrida is not like I'm certain, I'm not certain, right? Because like I said, I haven't read it, but the entailments of his description of Marx function more like a ghost, like a moving through, or how does one consider his contemporaneous climate? Because Derrida was aware of such things as like the Red Scare, right? And here's a philosopher here. And so you get someone like Peterson now that damns him as being somehow he claims that Derrida's ideology maps isomorphically or one-to-one with Marx. And it's simply an absurdity that he's calcifying this parallel, this isomorphic parallel, where one certainly does not exist. One's critique of someone else's work, because it's contemporaneous, does not mean that you're aligning with this claimed ideology, right? To pinpoint Marx, the man of text, as being responsible for Stalin, responsible for Lenin. Granted, let's say he started a spark, a type of fire, and these are what yielded from it. It doesn't mean Marx himself, Marx per se, is somehow ideologically the practitioner, the executor of these ideologies. So this modern day, this kind of cloak of horseshit, like when you take someone like Peterson, and he's just like anybody else, I think. He's got a lot of facets, and he's getting a lot of airtime, and he's got his clout and his credentials, right? But he lives on this authoritarian credentialism, but it is like a credentialism, such that he is educated formally in psychology, but then somehow he believes this notion of his maps of meaning, which I will bring back to dots, right, is somehow more correct, more prestigious, more like for those whom are ignorant, that don't want to explore the Bible or mythology. He will then he'll fill in the gap with his brand of what a map of meaning is, where he'll echo upon a Pinocchio myth, and then he'll say that what is happening is chaos versus order, as if to leave it as that which is chaotic, which I said, like a word salad, one could perceive as chaotic, and those who can perceive an order in it or map a meaning to it are mapping a meaning. But by the idea, like I like the idea that his book is maps of meaning, and I haven't read it, right? And so maybe my dissent about him is a problem itself. But my notion, my belief is that, like I was saying earlier, individuals, they bond with media. Their maps of meaning are found individualistically from their subjective. Who says what? What's the best thing, the funniest thing you heard of every single person that you know? You know, could you name it? Could you find meaning in it? Could you map out what the funniest thing is or the worst thing is or whatever something is about everybody? Could you point to movie quotes, music quotes? Do you have a map in your head, a genre that is less than sterile or more than sterile, that's an impassioned genre of map meaning, just in terms of even your sentiment, your sentimentality towards those whom you love, the meaning, what can come of those people, what they've brought to you, what they know that you don't know, what just anything and everything that is this hugely like a neuro net of involvement, this ecstatic, amazing ongoing neuro net that then is echoed by, like if you say Langan, like maybe, like if Langan's correct, so to speak, then the internet functions as a metaphor for my neural net, right? The more intelligent I become, or the greater my bandwidth becomes, the more the internet itself will become intelligent, right? It's the brain above brains. It's the meta of the God. It's the intermediary meta of our neurons that relates outbound. And so that's where I'm talking about dots, right? You get these dots of meaning, and then it makes me wonder what my relational status is to all of these dots, right? In terms of my own composition. And that's what, you know, I have a rat's asshole right there. So I'm like, why do I have this rat's asshole right there? Like, this is a rat. Right? Why do I have a rat? And for like yesterday, I was so disgusted by what it is I was producing. And I had to de-impassion myself, remove my overarching hate of who I've become to renaturalize more of a placid approach to floating my boat once again upon it, regardless of my notion of the perceived ailment that others might receive from it. And hopefully they're charitable enough to me to understand that. But it might not mean that they want to involve themselves in such a thing. The greater and crisper or more classified, polished I can make a piece, the more appreciated it is. But it also takes on the mirror between high technique and low content, right? And so you compare and contrast the combinatorial nature of that which disgusts you that is propagated with a refinement. I'm not saying this is refined, and I'm saying the content oscillates between something maybe necessarily negative and maybe not so necessarily negative, right? But as far as icons and symbols, it's, well, trademarks and symbols, I guess, you know, or like somehow, like while I was painting her shirt, I'm like, well, it's like a sailor shirt, but it's like an 80s shirt, and I don't see this fashion style, although this haircut seems to be occurring. It's trending much more with women, the shaved hair and the dyeing of the pinks. And I mean, when you think about like the history of Jelly Belly, I think they were called Jelly Belly beans, gumdrops, that all of a sudden there was like 20 different flavors, and then that increased to 200 flavors, and then increased to like 500 different flavors, and they had it all scaled out where you could eat like a chocolate mint watermelon or some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of fruity alligator mint pie bean or something weird, right? And so now that hair dyes and possibility and that which is motley yields that which is fauve, But then what of your population of people, right? How do you disambiguate standard historic classifications of different peoples and then reiterate how they're classified and then figure out all the nuanced differences as this ongoing motley? And then what do you say about the conservative relative to the motley, the preservation of that which is pure and classical, and reiterated with a type of what is considered like a historic ethos? Like, why would you rather listen to non-lyrical classical music and be relaxed and feel refined and well positioned in life and not around a lot of clutter, compared to see, I had something in mind that I was wanting to compare that to, and it wasn't just an opposition to that. It was, well, you could say like A Clockwork Orange's use of Beethoven as a type of comparison. Not that that's at all where I wanted to go with it. And I wasn't trying to paint my art here. I was at a loss of trying to speak about a type of population that maintained these classical form structures compared to, let's say, yeah, I was going to say the Free the Nipple campaign becomes the Free the Labia campaign, which becomes the Free the Bleeding Labia campaign, right? Which then, if the wave, let's say the wave of faux feminism or not libertarian in a classical ideology of one's freedoms constituted, but one's overarching freedoms of individual expression went beyond whatever the set form is, such that nudist colonies in any derogatory sense of living down would be, one would in the modern day be able to take on a primitive disclosure of sexuality and all bodily conducts from shitting to pissing to bleeding as being normalized, such that in the Puritan classicism, these are very marginalized, independent, grouped off, almost legally. You have to be licensed to have a nudist beach. You have to separate men and women's bathrooms. You have to segment something based on some sort of classes, and that margin just like blows open, right? So everyone's like in a more, let's say, a more well-tempered area for such people that would show up to Burning Man that weren't about just color, but about, I don't know, even people at Burning Man have some sort of real ritualistic function of expression and art. But that's the whole point, is how do we stave off the negatives? And then I just wonder to what extent have I poisoned and persist years, decades later now, plurally, decades of persisting through a type of not really well-defined genre of artwork. Meaning I take things personally because, like I said, I feel like I am immoral. I'm putting forth a type of immorality that, but then somehow within that, even with all of these senses of like being within a, like, I hate me using, or like all these senses that I have, of feeling immoral are offset. Almost a one-off occurs with this offsetting, repocketing myself happens. I simply accept my lot, and I'm better well off for it. But in terms of as I move myself, as I scale myself up to what I think is the most ethical or the most ideal, I find what it is I'm doing in repudiation. I find it in disgust. and it's like the sense of shitting in a Chinese hole amongst a group of people with your asshole hanging out and you're smelling everything, as opposed to the princess porcelain, well closed, well scented, easily flushed bathroom of the modern day, right? And then, oh well, I'm just above this flushing shit tunnel, right? So let me show you guys these dots of meaning, where each dot is like a very like characterizing, instead of a pet rock, I'm characterizing pet turds, right? It's like, I don't know. And then I oscillate between trying to idolize other people's forms when I do portraits and stuff. And basically, in all of this, like, I would simply, because of yesterday, take a break on all of this. But I've also put forward the idea of having a show come December that I need paintings for. And there's a competing gallery called Opposition Gallery, and I'm writing a book on contradiction. And all of it feels like a sense of, I don't know, like, put it this way, in from the relief that I got this morning after I had this weird dream about meeting up with Bono and having this internet conversation, like a camera to camera internet conversation with this guy that had died, knowing that he had died, like he was in another dimension. We're having a face to face, otherworldly conversation. And then all of a sudden I'm with U2's Bono later on, meeting him like in New York, and then going on this weird like hike into this building structure, and then ending in like an auto room and like a cafeteria where no one's eating, but they're all gathered around, of like younger people from Fame, and they know it's Bono, but they like, it was just this idea of them going through me because I had bonded with Bono somehow, and he was extracting himself from, like saying that he was really powerful. And then I was also thinking about these other people I know in New York, and then thinking of these buildings in New York, and then wondering, is this where I'm placing myself, is in New York? And what is it I think that I'm doing with the painting, other than bonding these meaning bits? And so, but I'm not ultimately like the saving grace of all of this after this weird dream was simply, once again, this repocketing myself in a practical position that allowed this continuance of my being to continue, even if my most highest ethos or ethic would be to remove this. Like, I literally covered this whole thing up last night. I was ashamed by it. And then today, but the phrase was basically like things may be wrong in your mind or humans' minds, but everything's perfect and in God's eyes. Meaning, I don't know. I'm obviously not quoting anything specific, but it had something to do with the imperfection and the anxieties that come from, just human to human to self to other traumas, dramas and traumas and wars and problems and ethics, and how somehow, because it is all allowed, somehow it's all okay. Like it has a meant to be-ness that that in itself is disgusting. When somebody says this is meant to be, that they're sustaining something that they themselves know is like it's reputable and it's glossed over shit, and they're still positing it outward. What is it they are, and why is it that other humans bond with it, associate with it, or think about it in such ways that are, sometimes very insightful. I don't know. That's why, a new esoteric philosophies, I believe, have a place. We just don't know what place they have. And so I think because of modern tech, there should be communities of active 3D spaces, such that we're not sharing this kind of one-sidedness. I could have a hangout where other people came in, and you guys would once again see this on the outside, or you'd have be tied to it within it upon joining. But it would be like a virtual reality 3D shared space where we're all meeting, and then we can invite and import and export any datum, and then we can interact with a common 3D art form in order to function in terms of investigation of, let's say, philosophical ideas, and to bring over a type of educational, not an autodidact, but a community autodidact, or a community education format where we can make we can make voluminous philosophical ideas, right? And so if you take on a voluminous idea, or you grant over a new type of supplement of a word, right, or of a propositional claim, for example, the idea of a belief. It's okay. You could, like I got into a huge argument about whether or not a belief is a type of attitude towards a proposition, and that proposition then takes a justified relationship or a mapping to the world, and that if it maps to the world and you form the proposition and it maps to the world, that the mapping to the world in a way functions as justification. And then if the justification is yielded by the community as being the case or true based on a type of agreement, that thing is considered what knowledge is. So that knowledge is a justified true belief, and belief is an attitude towards a proposition. Well, and so how would one make a voluminous a domain in which to write like a Venn diagram that says, now this is what belief is, and then maybe start some arrows and start some directionality to what it is belief is going through, right? And then, but then in my particular case, I also aberrate away from this orthodoxy of philosophy, which is attempting to define the limits and the rudiments of what a belief is, right? To say, well, like if I say, if I just speak of God, just the concept God, if you've heard of it and you're not part of the Piraha or some primitive group that doesn't have this, you can at least conceptualize, maybe not with a signified, but you have a notion of what God is. So the proposition, I believe in God, would be, that takes on a different relationship than saying, I believe my car is parked outside, right? So, or I believe my car is in the carport, something like that, like a knowledge claim, right? And so I'm not trying to disjunct those two, but what I'm saying is that if I say I know my car is parked outside, but I'm not witnessing it, so I did see it because that's where I left it, and then there's no reason to bring in doubt, then I support that as knowledge, and only upon interrogation do I have to reassess and then maybe class rank the word down to knowledge and say, Well, since I last saw it, maybe there's a caveat, an inclusion of doubt that someone else brought via this interrogation that now has me orient my belief down from that. Now, this is still within the orthodox structure of what knowledge is relative to belief. But when you're referring, so that this is a little convoluted, right? But again, make back to a type of a VR, right? Is that you would have a belief based on abduction that is, instead of saying, my belief is about a proposition, and if the proposition maps to the world, that's the justification. I would then say that you could have a belief about something of the world directly without importing a proposition. And then you might have that, okay, well, then what do you mean by belief? Or what are the components of your belief, right? And so in one way, it's like a short circuiting where you're saying, hey, here's these aspects in reality, right? Like if you're about ready to cross the street and a car is coming at you, you might not move, you might move out of the way without formulating the proposition, an object is coming at me, or I believe the car is coming at me, right? And so through an abduction, you have a background, like a culmination of organismal contrasts relative, being binocular to know that there's an object with a faith belief that objects could cause damage, different than in a VR. A VR car going through you might cause an emotional, the dissonance between the belief of a real car and not the belief. And so that would be a different type of indexing, right? But my point is that the idea, the promotion of the idea that a belief is one's attitude towards a proposition is itself, it's, I will grant over that as a complete indexing, right? It's a comprehensive structure that's been worked on through the modern Western philosophical canon for some time now, even through Frege and Wittgenstein and logical truth tables and propositional analysis and all of how it's fettered out. Grant that over, but let's run a tangent and say that tangent directly to the world as a type of abductive logic, if you will, if I can say that, is as viable to speak on belief, that I have, my belief is contingent upon my attitude, if you will. Even the word attitude might be a problem, on the world, different than an attitude towards a proposition. And it's only in a reapproach to one's memory. I was using the word recursion, but I don't mean it in the recursive aspect. I mean it in a remembering, I had a very specific word that I don't have now for it. But basically, only upon a type of reflection of the event does one say, I knew the car was coming at me, or I believed the car would hit me. And I believed the car would hit me because of this. So it was a recursive attribute, an application, a post hoc, ad hoc application, an ad hoc post hoc application of an event to the event, right? So even the proposition, the dog is on the mat, right? Like if you guys have a dog on your end that's on a mat, I don't own a dog. I don't have a mat that a dog, I mean, I have a mat the dog can sit on. I don't have a dog, right? You could talk with the dog on the mat, and then you can say, I believe that the dog is on the mat. Even if you went to the other room, you could say, I still believe the dog is in the mat, whether or not the dog is in the mat. And all I would have left if you were making that proclamation would be the signs and the non-empirical reference. So I would have to imbue a bit of trust to you, right? My believing that you're sincere and that you believe the dog is on the mat is fine. I have no, unless I invest something in that game of entrusting your claims. I don't really like, I'm without belief, meaning the term belief is non applicable. It's non applicable. If then a third person said, well, do you believe that there is a dog on the mat? Without a referent, based on your trust of this other person who is in another room and just left their dog on the mat. And at that point, it would just throw me up into the inquisition on belief now is requiring that I fall through this manifold of, what the distinctions are. And it's just very problematic. And anyway, the whole point is that I believe there's another indexing for belief that is occurring in the immediacy of moments that then is reapplied back to proposition. But during that, in lieu of the proposition occurring as a signified from within my mind, in lieu of that, between the time that I state it and then the time that I claim it, I still will index that there was a word belief that I was using as my medium in the world that is distinct from the propositional claim of what it is I believe. And so I was trying to discuss this in these philosophical groups, right? And yet they keep trying to necessarily rebond me to the proposition, right? And even Derrida was talking about, hey, there's nothing outside of the word chain, basically, like all words defer to other words, almost as if to say that the external world is only populated with signifieds, and that the only way that we derive meaning is via the language, such that this woman would have to take on the idea of woman, but what is that? What is that? Right? And you might say, oh, well, that's merely an abstract because I cannot extract anything from that domain other than, like you would say, oh, it's brown, it's a canvas, it's there's some abstract color, it's something, right? But other people may be able to extract something, pick up from this domain without granting it over kind of a title, right? That's what I meant earlier about the counterfactual, surreal ideas that we grant stuff through via the language, via meaning. But if I just meditate, if I cut that out and put its contrasting against the white wall, so to speak, you might meditate on the contrast. But the whole point is that I disagree also with Derrida in that one's like there is no escaping the words, meaning you can stop them. I've lost my inner monologue or had a relationship to my inner monologue such that it appeared vacant. Or so marginalized I couldn't separate it out from like coming out of a sleep mode or something like that. So it was basically an empty cavern, almost to say that my words are just coming out of the edge of my lips and not really anything else. Yeah. Anyway, and so I guess how to sum that little segment of this genre up is that I think that one's phenomena, the qualia, right, even though people are trying to dissuade the idea of qualia, really it is a pointing once again to that which is observable, not, as an organism, in kind of a primitive, dumbed down, out of awake mode where maybe imagery is more profound than the employment or the auto-employment of language. And that's why I was also speaking about, like, look, we can ascribe the word knowledge to an infant that does not have a priori knowledge, right? And so the modern Western philosophical canon once again re-insists that knowledge is justified true belief, and yet it requires that there is a type of post-lingual or articulability that a child can have, such that a 2-week-old child not being able to speak with language yet is still reactive to the world. We could say that the organism of the child knows something contrasting to its environment. We can use the word and ascribe it to the child, saying that the child knows it. Look, it obviously knows it. Look what it's choosing here over here. But it's not within the ascription of being populated within the language, right? So because of these exceptions, based on belief or based on the prelingual child or based on these domains of referent of one's prelingual, pre-articulate, pre-language being, you'll have what I would say is an a posteriori knowledge set, and that we can index it as such. It's colloquially used, and it's not, so once again, it's not a denial of what's being presented. It's another indexing. It's another grouping that's tangential to that, but it can take on prowess of its own. So anyway, let's see what's now it's being that I play the guitar and diatonic phonics again. Sweet. I know many people that throw the term cultural Marxism around on social media and can't articulate anything about Marxist specific criticisms of capitalistic market ideology. Right. And then there here, even if they had an argument against, boy, because they have an engagement, right? My ear seems heavy. What kind of things make you cheerful again? You could, so those types of things. You seem like you could find some benefit from some form of private Kierkegaardianism devotion. Huh? Well, that would be interesting. Are you too intellectual to give yourself over to pure worship? Oh, yeah, like to become a devotional disciple of a particular group. I'm not. I'm open to the idea of dedicating myself to another author, another something, but I like what's happening. Yeah, I'm heavy-hearted right now, certainly, and it's really, it is weighing on me, and in a way, I'm like squirting my way through it. But I have a certain degree of suppression. I mean, everyone has some sort of suppression, and this then once again comes back to like my duration of time of sitting here is both. It's like a regular bodily person, a healthy bodily person in a healthy body could sit here at great lengths, 8-10 hours. At one point, though, my body will run into a distress mode earlier than normal, and that distress mode goes when I'm out in public. I can only walk roughly a block or two before I am, like I walked around a city block, and I think that might have come to just under a mile or something like that here in Salt Lake, and it was painful enough to drive me to want to drink because I'm not taking certain things. So there's this physiological level that is heavy, and because though I am also now illegal to drive, I cannot escape. I can only use public transportation or use other people giving me lifts or use Lyft or Uber, that type of thing. But my limit to my environment is so huge and so costly now that it's re-cocooned me. I'm repositioned. And so that itself has granted me a sense of the heavy heart. beyond all of what I was going on about, in terms of this and that, and this and that, and this and that, and this and that. Jerry was a race car driver. He drove so goddamn fast. He never did win a checkered flag, but he never did come in last. Won't do number one. We're gonna look what the fuck doing, find up just for fun. Is I became heavy-hearted almost yesterday because, and this is the thing I guess I didn't disclose, right, is that the same woman that helped me with the electricity and my old girlfriend, it's a friend that I played grab ass with, that critiqued me as being sterile and mirrored me and shadowed me, plus brought her like chronic neuroses of her life into my life with this huge thing. She accused me of being malicious, right? That I was hiding something up my sleeve, which I was trying to go over before, that I thought was just merely how I hold myself or my gait or my presence, but that I don't have ill will. I'm not out to perpetuate some sort of, ripping anyone off or stealing anything particularly. But then upon being questioned that, I disclosed to her what it is I did do with her, which was that without her knowing, I recorded our conversation the other day while I was painting, right? I took that group trust, and even though there was 24 views on it from people that have no real connection with her or knowledge with her, it was this sense of distrust and even perhaps illegality, although there's some states that allow an individual to have, like, either party may record anything without disclosing it. And then there's other states that say both parties need to be known that they are being recorded. And so I made verbal implications that it was happening without just directly stating it. So, and then she found that very, very upsetting. And then she says, but it, and I said it was a level of trespass that I have used historically, but only for sentimental reasons. I said, I want to capture oftentimes people in candidness, even though I then am aware that I learned my lesson. I mean, I contract with people to not record stuff, right? And then I've been violated by people recording me without me knowing, like this current roommate that I have. And so there's generally this unspoken rule of you don't do that, and there may be legal code that suggests that you don't do that. But I was explaining about, for people like Barklord, for example, who know Canada, right? And I just use the word Canada because I think we know who I'm talking about. And Canada, like, she watched me once record my parents without them knowing. And I've done that a few times because I wanted their non-performative candid being to be displayed as a type of archive, right? They're already in a documentary, right? That's public, right? And they're already, I mean, there is a degree of privacy assumed, but in the modern day, it's becoming less and less all around us. And I'm not using, that's kind of my justification as far as arguing of the coextensive nature of people mixed into each other's worlds. But for me, there was a degree of sentimentality, my value of capturing someone not knowing they were being recorded because they would function candidly, had this value to me that was for my own keepsake album. And that, so I mean, the whole interest was that I move those videos to being delisted or unlisted without deleting them. so that they function within my album. But the way I was characterized was that this was like a form of methodological abuse, and but it was so interesting because it was, to me, it was so pithy and so tiny, and it wasn't actually what she was afraid of with me. It was like she had some other notion of this like agenda that I had, or some sort of I don't know, something underhanded or untrustworthy or unvirtuous. Like, she'll laud and appreciate all the art stuff. This is all my problem. But something about me, it was distrustful. And I said, like, there's this general air that I've put across my simulation, my simulacra, of what it is I am socially relative to other people having this perhaps fear of me. And that I believe is like a type of, like, I've played against that fear wall in terms of a persona, and maybe she was reading off of that, but I was taking her description of me personally. And so because I was taking this description that was more than just like what do I want to say there? I'm not saying that she knew that I had recorded her, and so she was accusing me of that, because prior to that, she had this same thing about me. I was just really homing in on it. And so basically, to justify her instinct that I was doing something malicious, I disclosed the fact that I had recorded the video a couple days prior, and I played it and showed it to her, and let her use that as an example as to why it is, as a justifier to her unjustifiable notion prior to this, right? So it was almost like I was shoring up something that she could use to lash against me. And she did for a little bit, and then she moved into a cycle, and we've already repaired from the moment. And in the same way, like men might fight and then become friends with those that they fight. I count on something like that, where if someone suspects something of you, you generate the reason to justify that suspicion. Meaning that's also something I'm aware of. And so sometimes I will do that. Or I will look at past tense descriptions. For example, I have a relative, a young relative, that their parents would not allow me to drive them or be alone with them. If I was in a good relationship with a particular woman, it was okay. But as soon as I was out of that relationship, the woman of the child found me untrustworthy, because how could this man not be in a relationship like I am in? I speculated. Right. And she had these other reasons, because I have a weird history, but this is all before I kind of fell into my modern madness. So this was happening pre 2010. And somewhere between 2008 and 2010, this was known as a bias, even though this had been occurring since 2003. And so finally, because what's keeping me from driving now is that I got into a DUI. I ran a red light and crashed into a vehicle, and I had enough alcohol in my system that was barely over the legal limit, because I thought that I was okay. And nonetheless, no one got hurt, and I've had to deal with that. So the repercussions of this particular event, that's not good to disclose generally. Like, hey, I'm emptying out my closet to the public, right? As kind of a type of confessional. But what I realized is that years later, in the year 2018, from 2003, when this untrust or biasness, or basically a distrust, was being lauded against me, except for when I was in relationships with women, like long-term relationships, 2 to 3 years basically. This was levied against me, and I could not figure out why this was being levied against me. And so I noted, I said, well, I once babysat this child for 20 minutes, right? And so I was granted over that. And then earlier this year, before this DUI situation, I was finally able to drive this teenage child. It's not that I was in isolation with her, but I was the one driving the vehicle. And it was the very first time that either of the parents entrusted me to drive. And I had never, ever, ever been in a wreck in my life until this DUI. And so the parents have worse driving records in terms of wrecks than I ever did. So it didn't make any sense. And so anyway, the whole point of this long little story, thanks for watching my tangent here, is that finally after I got in the wreck, right, then I said, in retrospect, I said, finally now they actually have real justification to tell me why it is that they never trusted me. Something like that, right? To be the driver. Anyway, and this is all stupid stuff, but this is what I meant by kind of a retroactive shoring up of something to allow people to point to and justify their own bias towards me. And it's so great when I have friends that are so beyond this. They don't have a care in the world. I'm entrusted fully, knowingly, apparently, it's not underhanded trust. It's right on the surface. It's just eye to eye, boom. And I'm like, man, it's so great that I'm able to get that from people that are, more distant from me in space and time and relation. Anyway, boy, am I rambling. How long have I been going here? Shit, 2 hours and 17 minutes. And what have I painted? Only a mere little gobbledygook? Little googly gob. Okay, well, guys, I don't want to go on too much. Obviously, I mean, this could be an analysis video. I could attempt to repaint, but I think with these 2 phone calls that I've gotten since I started this, that I should probably hang up already, drop the damn brush, come back to this later, knock this thing out, don't make a big deal out of it, because I've already done this rodeo of self-immoral reorientation, regrouping, and re-self-seeding enough to not let it get to me, if that makes sense. And yet sometimes I allow it to get to me. And in this particular case, I wanted to pull it out and display it, both verbally and, basically verbally, to whomever, because I want these types of topics and considerations to be placed outward from me so that others can see me and then make their judgment, their assessments of me, in hopes that I'm also granted over a degree of charity. Maybe you can maintain this degree of nervousness about me, and justifiably, and I disclose this. Now you guys have justification. And then you guys can describe me, even the seemings, like Barklord, seeming that I have a heavy heart. To say that I do is one thing. To say that I don't is another thing. To believe that I know to the degree of heaviness that he's ascribing relative to mine, it's more just like, hey, what do you think about this idea? You have a heavy heart. It's like, okay, I can go there. I can feel that. Why not? Seems to fit for the time being. Not regularly a thing, but okay. And so, Ben, back to the beginning as far as intoxicants. Since the DUI, no drink, no smoke, no nothing. Even coffees and caffeines went away. Very placid, very regulated frequency. My intelligibility and my articulation components seem to be like falling into order again. That seem to be more relatable to people within these group conversations. A rounded out kind of comedic approach was absented generally, not entirely, but generally. And then boom, drop into intoxicants again all at once. Okay, well, that being said, let's see. Oh, well, maybe you shouldn't have. But you did get that album, Asa. Okay, oh, I thought Vladimir had taken on. Let me read a couple more of these real quick to myself. Oh, yeah. And then my only goal is to outlive Amendum. This is officially my final comment for tonight. All right. Well, I thought you'd taken off. Glad you remain. And I trusted you enough. I trust you enough to give you my address. Well, that's a good thing. Okay. Well, hopefully, even though this is the attacking element, the haunt coming in after, then this one, because people humans are weird by being attacked from above, apparently. And then I'll have this weird, maybe protection flying saucer and this weird energy that will remain as a type of anomalous. You don't know what side it's about. And then the populations of other entities that I can throw in the background and are not yet known, and how to refine the whole thing is still, once again, not known. Fear and desire and will, the space between, the speech act, the impassionate of music, the knowledge sets, the histories of pockets of belief throughout time, and all of their disjunct, all shoring up to our contemporaneous being, presented again and again and again in an ongoing onslaught that doesn't seem to end. And so within all of this mega random data of this new communication and recording ability, we are all left both at the mercy and whim and drives from ourselves to the world and of the world to us, and then in some solipsistic integration with itself, everything, one's emotions, empowerment, everything everybody brings to the table. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being you, whomever you are, in all of your distinctiveness. And we will pick this up again next time. Cheers. Out. And when is my Benjamin Button's disease actually going to reverse? Begin its reversal, that is. Come on, get the young stem cell pill now.